Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on our program today. I'm Armando F. Sanchez. I have the honor, honestly, the honor today of interviewing Maceo Montoya, preparatory notes for future masterpieces, a novel. Hey, I got a book. I got a book. And how did I come in contact with Maceo? We have a mutual friend, Daniel Olivas. He's always promoting Latino literature and telling me about, great people I should interview, and he's one of them. So I want to hands off and thank you, Daniel, for helping us on this show. Well, let's go a little bit with Maceo's background. I'm very, very impressed. Maceo came from a tiny, tiny, tiny town. I think it has 1,500 people in it.
No, 300.
300. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to make it into a metropolis. Elmira, California. I literally had to look it up. Where is? I've never heard of it. And you went to Yale and Columbia for your bachelor's and master's in fine arts. And you've written a lot of books, and now you are working as an associate professor, Chicana Studies, UC Davis, very well respected institution here. It just wonderful, wonderful work. And this is one of your many novels and work that you have, and as a professor. Now, what I understand from you is this wasn't really written as a literary work for your classroom. This was something you did sort of on your own. Tell us about your book.
Yeah, so I'm a visual artist. I guess I feel like I started as a visual artist, and early on, when I was painting, I wanted to tell the stories in my paintings, and so I started with like elaborate titles, and then they became a little bit longer. And so my first attempt at a novel was a series of paintings based on this character Juan Jose, an undocumented field worker in this town of Knights Landing. And all of these stories that I wrote down, and that was kind of my grand vision. I'm going to tell stories through painting and also through text. And I realized that my development at the time, this was in my early 20s, that the writing and the art kind of had to develop at their own pace. And so ever since, I've done different visual textual works. My book, Letters to the Poet from His Brother, is a mix of my paintings and these kind of memoir-like essays. And then I also published a book, a Chicano Movement for Beginners, that I was asked to both write the history, but then also provide the illustrations. I've done collaborations with poets where I've read their work and then have created a series of paintings based on that poetry. But this was the first story that I wrote that was about an artist. And at first I just wrote the novel, the text. But because it was about an artist, I think in the back of my head, I was always like, what would his drawings look like? And the novel sat for a number of years, or didn't sit exactly. I was always editing it, revising it, sending it out, but it was getting rejected, wasn't picked up by a press. And in that time, it allowed me to kind of continue with that thought. What would it be like to take this story, which is about his journey from a 18-year-old to the point where he's an old man reflecting on his life? What would it be like to also illustrate that story? And so in 2018, I decided to I'm going to pick out the 5 scenes from each chapter, and I'm going to illustrate them. And it was a lot of fun because I didn't feel the pressure of these have to be my drawings, like Maceo Montoya. These are the characters' drawings. And yes, there's a lot of
you pass the responsibility over to the
exactly
the fictitious characters.
Exactly. So any criticism of the drawing, blame the narrator. And it was a lot of fun. I took lines from the text and I would type them on the typewriter that I had in the back in my studio. I would cut them out. I would cut out, different faces and layers and so I felt like I had entered into the narrator, much like as an author, you enter in the voice of your characters. And so then for me, it kind of became an object. You have the memoir left behind and you have the illustrations. And so it kind of begged the question, well, who came across this object? And that led me to, well, when he passed away, it must have been left to somebody. Well, maybe it was left to his nephew, and the nephew didn't know what to do with it. So he shared it with his friend Lorraine Rios, who's like a Chicano history buff. And then the two of them decided to send it to this Professor Pizarro, who's an expert in Chicanx literature, Latinx literature. So the book is full of footnotes that are commenting on the text, both by the nephew, Ernie Lobato, Lorraine Rios, the kind of amateur historian, and the professor. And to me, that's when it kind of had all of the frames to feel complete. It was both the story of this young man and his journey, trying to be an artist, the preparatory notes for future masterpieces. He's never quite able to make the masterpieces that he felt were his destiny, but he is able to leave this testimony of his life. That's one story. But then the other part of it is the kind of the literary component, where these figures are commenting on how this story situates itself within Latinx literature.
One of the, as I read the book, one idea kept coming across to me. It says, you know, there's constantly a mention, a desire to be famous, a desire to see your work become a masterpiece. And I thought about it and I said, isn't that something really everyone wants, to be sort of, what did I do during my lifetime? What did I create? How did I benefit? What did I contribute? Aren't we sort of all haunted by that question in our minds?
I think so. It's funny. I was thinking of a George Orwell essay that he wrote, where I think it was his question, like the essay was "Why I Write," and at some point he said that most people kind of give up on those ideas of like posterity or making their mark on the world. Not making their mark on the world, but like these kind of grandiose ideas of what their life's, you know, mission or intent, and the kind of, you know, dissipates by the time you're 29 years old. And I don't know why he chose that number.
I know, I was wondering.
And I, you know, I don't think that that's true, and I don't necessarily think that it's you know, you have kind of an elevated sense of self, or an inflated sense of self, if you have this desire to kind of make your mark. And that could be different than being famous, right? That, I think that's different. I think it's more like I want my story and the stories of those that I love and that I care about, and the community that I want these stories that are essential to me. I want those to be preserved in some way. Now, if you're an artist, I guess you want those to be preserved. Yeah, it'd be amazing to like create these masterpieces and have them be preserved masterfully. But I think there is a desire for, you know, that's very kind of elemental to who we are as humans, that we're able to kind of record and preserve the life that we live, and the people that were close to us. And I always have this assignment with my students, and I kind of borrow it from Tomas Rivera, the early Chicano author. He had this desire to kind of preserve the community that he grew up with, the farm workers in the 1940s and 50s. And he says, para siempre, forever. And I pose that question to my students: who is it that you would want to preserve forever? And I say the stakes are really high, because if they're not preserving those stories, then those stories are going to be lost. And I think that my novel, it deals with that to a certain extent, this idea of, yes, they have this desire, the characters' desire for their mark to be made, for their stories to be told. And the sad part is they're so far on the margin, so far in the periphery, that you know as a reader, or you suspect as a reader, that they're going to be forgotten by history and their mark will not be made, which is, you know, sadly most of our fate.
Two things. I remember a cartoon many years ago that said a person was going to eulogize, was asked to eulogize somebody that had passed away. He got up there and he says, "As far as I know, John, I don't know if John did anything." That was it. That was
Yeah. There you go.
And then the other thing is, I'll take issue with that, what whoever said 69 Orwell. I would say, you know, I'm 70, and with the core of people I'm with, I think that question comes up more as we get older. What did I do with my life? What have I done? Is there some, gee, if I didn't do anything, can I do anything in the last, forgive me for not doing anything. Is there anything I can do this last few years that I have left? I think I don't think it ever dies. I think there's a internal desire. But I like what you said, that some people think of it, well, I'm going to go on an ego trip. But that leads me to my next question. For someone like you, people like you who have all these stories and all these pictures in your head, what happens if you don't let them out?
um you're like racked by anxiety, you're depressed, you're um because I've never suffered from writer's blocks per se, right? I find that it's mostly an issue of time and circumstances, and this was, as much as my character struggles with madness, his woes as an artist are absolutely my woes. I think maybe just pushed to an extreme. Like all of the excuses that he gives for not finally putting brush to canvas are all excuses that have entered my head over the years, which is, the time isn't right. I'm having to deal with too many things that doesn't allow me the kind of the peace of mind to work on my creativity, to enter
It's
into.
never the right time.
Yeah. And so I think that the frustration comes from you're torn in all these different directions, and the world isn't set up for the space that artists need, right? I to this day I'm frustrated that I have to get a job, um, and I have to pay the bill. Like, it just, what I have to get, I have to leave, I have to go do something else than what I want to do all day, right? Because I know how long it takes to write a novel, how long it takes to make a painting, and I should be able to, dedicate all of my time to that. I should even be able to dedicate all of, hours just to thinking and just sitting there and drinking coffee and reading, because I know that those moments are necessary for that moment when I'm just gonna go and I'll actually put the brush to canvas. And yet, how difficult is it to kind of carve out that time in your life? And so, all of these different obligations, that both life just create, but then also society kind of expects of you to just be a fully functioning, contributing member to society, are often detrimental to an artist's practice. And so I think that there can be a lot of frustration when those stories aren't being told, but more it has to do with um, these pressures outside of the art itself.
What is your recommendation to someone that has that frustration where they're just banging their heads against the wall, i.e., trying to mix life with creativity in the mind?
Yeah. Well, I've with my novels very early on, one of my, like, I think my second novel that I attempted, I was reading John Steinbeck's journals that he was writing when he was working on East of Eden, and he set up a word count, and he was writing this journal, and would talk about, okay, I wrote my 2,000 words a day, and that was it, and then he'd move on to the next, and 2,000 words, 2,000. And I read elsewhere, Stephen King kind of has this manual on writing, and he suggested 1,000 words. I would just kind of go, like, look through all these different author interviews. Graham Greene, 500 words, Hemingway, 1,000 words, and what was their word count? And I realized, like, to imagine a novel in its entirety, 60,000 to 100,000, it's just too overwhelming.
Yes.
You'll never be able to do it if you're imagining I have to write all those words. But you can write 1,000 words a day in an hour or 2 hours. They don't have to be great, but at least you have the work. The work is there, and then after a couple of months with that consistency, you have those 60,000 words, or you have those 80,000 words, and with the brunt of the work there, then the fun part starts. Then that can be the inspiring part, or that's when you kind of polish the prose and the story really starts to come together. But the brunt of the work is there. And then on the visual art end, I think it was Picasso said, I don't know much about inspiration, but if it comes, it'll find me working, something like that. And I've always looked for these
Aha moments.
aha moments of, it's about kind of creating a routine where you carve out a part of your day. even if it's a half hour, even if it's an hour. If you have more, then great. And the artists and the writers who, you know, who have been most prolific, I think that they've managed to kind of find a way of carving out that time, because the external pressures are never going to go away. The circumstances that, you know, kind of pull you in these different directions, that's just life. And oftentimes they're good external pressures. You know, I come from a family that I love very much. I have a partner, Alejandra, who I love very much. I have this house with projects, you know, galore. I love doing all these things and spending time with the people surrounding me. And so to be this kind of, you know, crazed artist, always feeling like, you know, everything is pulling you away from that that's I've never desired to be like that. So for the time being, I find a way of carving out the time that I need.
One question that I think most writers and artists would have, and I think you're addressing it in some way, is the question is, how do you deal with the, what I will call the demons that are sitting in the back that says, why are you wasting your time? No one's going to see it. No one's going to read it. No one's going to remember it. No one's blah, blah, blah. It'll get lost, you know, in some, fall into some, I don't know, some black hole somewhere, and it'll disappear. All your work was for nothing. How do you deal with those demons?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have an answer, because I feel like those demons can, you know, it's always in the back of your mind. Like, why does the world, you know, need another Maceo Montoya novel, right? Like my first four are barely read, right? Like, did they really need another one? And the idea that, you know, most likely your work, our work, is going to disappear, but you don't have any control over that. All you have control over is making the best work that you can, and you know, really kind of finding satisfaction in the pursuit of the beauty of the work, the stories that you want to tell. And you know, I when I was in grad school, and this was for visual art, you know, we all had dreams of, all right, we're going to make our mark, and we're going to have our work in these galleries, or, you know, talking about, we're going to be at the center of, you know, the art world. And you know, I look up some of the friends that I went to school with, and I can't find them. I can't find their work, and I just assume like maybe they stopped making their art. And I think that that's the true kind of victory, right? When, if you can find a way to continue to make your art, um, you know, regardless of whatever success that you had, uh, get, you know, in terms of audience or some sort of external acceptance, then great. You know, if you have that, then, you know, the more power to you. But it's really about, if you are still making your work, then to me that's a success as an artist, because to do that is really, really difficult. And again, it goes back to all of those external pressures, right? It's far easier to follow some other path in life, that will give you these more immediate rewards, as opposed to kind of dedicating yourself to this very kind of tenuous, nebulous, uh, uh, um, uh, intangible form, right? You create something, and it can just be a file on your computer, like this novel was for so many years, almost 10 years. It was just a file on my computer, but yet I kept on returning to it. I have paintings in my studios that no one has ever seen. They're just turned against the wall. And if it was all about audience, right, or how it was going to be received in the world, it would be very difficult to continue to make work. It has to be about finding satisfaction in the process of creation itself.
If I can sort of jump on that and put my perspective on that same question, and you know, also respond. I've done thousands of interviews, and you know, it takes a lot of hours to put together. And people have asked me, you know, how many people watch your shows? I said, honestly, I don't know. I can't give you an exact number. He says, well, why do you do it? And from an artistic point of view, I finally had to answer for myself, because I like it. I
Mhm.
enjoy the moment. I enjoy doing this, talking to you. If I wasn't doing that, I would never have this opportunity. So I'm wondering, like yourself, where you sit down half the moment you're frustrated. I don't know what my next line is. And then at the same time, at the end, when you finish, it says, gosh, that was frustrating, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's some fun to this. There's nothing wrong with that, to make ourselves happy doing it.
yeah. No, I come from a family of artists, and I I I feel so lucky to be a part of that legacy, but I feel so lucky to be an artist. Like what a wonderful way of viewing the world. You know,
Mhm.
if I see something of beauty, I I know that I can use it, that it can become part of me, and then I can find a way of expressing it. And you know, always looking at the skies, or I'm looking at the landscapes, or I'm looking at a person's face, and I'm imagining it, what it would look like in a painting, right? Or if I have some sort of, you know, moment that seems remarkable to me, even if it's just like a symbolically, or can become a metaphor, it could become something that becomes part of the stories that I tell. I feel so lucky to have that be a facet of who I am and the way that I interact with the world. And so as much as you know, it can be a frustrating and difficult life, right? But it's also one that is so rewarding, because the act itself is such a fundamental part of who I am.
And also, I think, watching persons like yourself and others, you get to interact with a lot of people on your story, either pre or post or evaluations, good and bad, and but yet you get to evolve in a lot of ways. I noticed that one of the persons that reviewed your book is also someone I've interviewed, Reina Grande, also a
Mhm.
fantastic writer. And so you get to interact with people. You get to live a life where it isn't always where you're just by yourself writing. It's also all the interaction.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I would love our viewers to make sure that they can come in contact with you and learn more about your work, past, present, and future, because there's no way you're stopping. There's no way. So, where can persons look you up and find information of what's ongoing in your life right now?
Well, they can find me. My website is maceomontoya.com, and you can find just galleries of my artwork. You could also find out more information about my books. There are links there to interviews with me and reviews of my work, and so all that info can be found on my website. And
Do
also
you
you can contact me through my website.
do you do lectures? Do you go and visit and travel to schools or universities and as well? And also, if someone wanted to do that with you, how would they get a hold of you? Also through
Yeah,
the same.
absolutely. When I'm invited, and often it's in an academic context, or to speak to students at all levels. I've talked to high school students, community college, university students, and it's often great because they're an audience for my books. Yeah, so they can reach me either through my website or through my university email as well. You can find me at UC Davis. All my contact info is there as well.
Wonderful, Maceo. Your closing statements, open-ended, where there's so much has been covered, and you've given actually advice to individuals who are in the middle process of wondering, should I continue my work or not, or am I wasting my time? So I think you gave them a sense of hope and encouragement. Between your locura, hopefully it adds to their locura, and they do it and they continue forward.
Yeah, well, thank you, Armando.
Closing statements.
Back to my novel, Preparatory Notes for Future Masterpieces. I think it's a work about an outsider artist, an outsider from society, an outsider and misunderstood within his own family, and the characters who are kind of commenting on his life and commenting on Latino, Chicano, Chicanx literature. Um, they're talking about kind of the narrow parameters of the stories that are out there about the Chicano Latino community. And I think one of the takeaways I hope from this novel is that the stories of outsiders, right, are just as important, right? And we need to kind of expand this spectrum of stories that we tell and that are told about our communities, because we all know that we contain multitudes, as Whitman wrote, and those multitudes should be represented in our stories on the page, and beyond literature. They should be in films and other forms of popular media. Those stories need to be out there, not just within this kind of limited expectation of what's expected of the Chicano Latino community, but the outsiders among us, should have their say too.
Maceo Montoya, I want to thank you again. The Montoya name is very special in my family. My wife's family is Montoyas from Cananea, Sonora. So
Oh wow.
it's a very special name. And everyone I've come into with Montoyas, I've always enjoyed being with very creative individuals. So
Yeah,
may
yeah.
you continue your work. Aplauso to your familia who encouraged you to do it. I can only imagine what you were like when you were 5 or 6 years old in your first or second grade, and somebody gave you a crayon and says, draw blank. I mean, I think you were going on and on and on while everybody says that we're finished. And I think that's pretty much typical of your life. You will always continue.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Armando. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. And we hope to have you back in shows. And please, whenever possible, let us know more about what you're doing and keep encouraging people to also share their stories as well.
Absolutely.